Hello and welcome to Wolfe's Mystery, where every story feels like a conversation. Over a warm cup of coffee today, I bring you a brand new Nero Wolfe mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable. Let's unravel the case together, and if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in. From now, let's get started. Nero Wolfe solves the case that baffled the FBI for decades. Chapter 1. The Letter from the Past. The morning sun filtered through the drapes of Nero Wolfe's office, casting a warm glow on the orchids lining the windowsill. Wolfe, seated behind his desk, sipped his beer with the precision of a man who valued routine above all else. Archie Goodwin, perched on the edge of the red leather chair, flipped through the morning mail with his usual air of casual efficiency. "Anything of interest?" Wolfe asked, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the stillness of the room. "Bills, invitations, and—" Archie paused, holding up a plain white envelope. "This one's odd. No return address, just your name typed in all caps." Wolfie's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his usual composure. "Open it." Archie slit the envelope with his pocket knife and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The typewritten message was brief but cryptic. "The truth about the Blackwood case lies buried where the clock strikes 13. If you seek justice, meet me at the corner of Fifth and Elm at midnight. Come alone." Archie raised an eyebrow. "The Blackwood case? That's the one that stumped the FBI back in the 50s, isn't it?" Wolfe set down his beer, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. A case marked by incompetence, corruption, and a trail of dead ends. The FBI closed it decades ago, but the whispers of foul play never ceased." "You think this is legit?" Archie asked, leaning forward. "Could be a crank." "Possibly," Wolfe conceded, "but the specificity of the reference to the Blackwood case suggests otherwise. The phrase, 'where the clock strikes 13, is particularly intriguing. It implies a location tied to time, or perhaps a mechanism." Archie smirked. "Or someone has been reading too much Shakespeare." Wolfe ignored the quip, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Regardless, the invitation is too compelling to dismiss. We shall investigate. You want me to stake out the meeting spot?" Archie asked, already reaching for his coat. "No," Wolfe said firmly. "The note explicitly instructs me to come alone. I will honor that request, for now. However, you will remain nearby, out of sight but within reach if needed." Archie nodded, though his expression betrayed his unease. "You're walking into a potential trap, you know." "All the more reason to tread carefully," Wolfe replied, his tone calm but resolute. "Prepare the car. We leave at 11. As the clock neared midnight, Wolfe stood at the corner of Fifth and Elm, his imposing figure shrouded in a heavy overcoat. The street was deserted, the faint hum of the city a distant backdrop to the tension in the air. Archie waited in the car, a block away, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Minutes passed, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Just as Wolfe began to suspect he'd been led on a fool's errand, a figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf. She approached cautiously, her gloved hands clutching a small leather satchel. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Thank you for coming." "You have my attention," Wolfe replied, his gaze steady. "What do you know about the Blackwood case?" The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "Not here. It's too dangerous. Take this." She thrust the satchel into his hands. "Everything you need is inside, but be careful. They're watching." Before Wolfe could respond, she turned and disappeared into the night, her footsteps echoing faintly before fading into silence. He stood for a moment, weighing the satchel in his hands, then returned to the car where Archie waited. "Well?" Archie asked, eyeing the satchel. "What's the verdict?" Wolfe settled into the seat, his expression inscrutable. "Drive. We have much to discuss." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe opened the satchel to reveal a stack of documents, photographs, and a small, intricately designed pocket watch. The watch was unusual, its face marked with 13 numbers instead of 12. Archie whistled softly. 13 hours. Fancy that. Wolfe examined the watch carefully, his fingers tracing the delicate engravings. This is no ordinary timepiece. It's a key, or perhaps a map. The Blackwood case is far more complex than the FBI ever realized. Archie leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "So, what's the plan?" "We begin where all mysteries do," Wolfe said, setting the watch aside, "with the first clue. And this," he held up a faded photograph of a grand estate, "is where we start." The photograph bore the inscription, Blackwood Manor, 1952. The case that had baffled the FBI for decades was about to be reopened, and Nero Wolfe would leave no stone unturned. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Witness. The next morning, Nero Wolfe sat in his office, the contents of the satchel spread across his desk. The pocket watch with its 13-hour face gleamed under the soft light, its engravings now the focal point of his attention. Archie Goodwin leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as Wolfe meticulously examined each item. "Anything jump out yet?" Archie asked, breaking the silence. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver from the watch. The engravings are not merely decorative. They appear to be coordinates, latitude and longitude, perhaps, but their significance eludes me for now. Archie stepped closer, peering over Wolfe's shoulder. "And the documents? Anything useful there?" Wolfe gestured to a stack of yellowed papers, mostly FBI case notes from the original investigation. Redacted, of course, but there's a name that keeps appearing. Evelyn Hart. She was a maid at Blackwood Manor at the time of the incident. According to these notes, she was the last person to see the victim alive. "A witness?" Archie raised an eyebrow. Why wasn't she questioned more thoroughly? "A question worth asking," Wolfe replied, his tone tinged with disapproval. "The FBI dismissed her testimony as unreliable, but given the circumstances, I suspect there's more to her story." Archie picked up a photograph from the pile, a grainy image of a young woman in a maid's uniform, her face partially obscured. "This her?" Wolfe nodded. "Evelyn Hart. If she's still alive, she may hold the key to unravelling this mystery. And if she's not, then we'll have to rely on what she left behind," Wolfe said, his voice steady. "But first we must find her." The address listed for Evelyn Hart led them to a modest apartment building on the outskirts of the city. The neighbourhood was quiet, the kind of place where people kept to themselves and strangers stood out. Archie parked the car a block away, scanning the area for anything unusual. "You want me to go in alone?" Archie asked, his hand resting on the door handle. Wolfe shook his head. "No, this requires a delicate touch. We'll go together." They approached the building, Wolfe's imposing figure drawing curious glances from a few passers-by. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and stale coffee. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where Evelyn Hart's apartment was located. Archie knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. There was no answer. He tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. "She's not home," Archie said, glancing at Wolfe. "Or she's not answering." Wolfe's expression darkened. "Try the door." Archie tested the knob. It turned easily, the door creaking open to reveal a dimly lit apartment. The air inside was cold, the stillness unnerving. "Hello?" Archie called out, stepping inside. "Miss Hart?" The apartment was sparsely furnished, the walls bare except for a single photograph of Blackwood Manor hanging above the fireplace. The furniture was old but well kept, the kind of pieces that had seen decades of use. But what caught their attention was the overturned chair in the centre of the room, its legs splayed awkwardly across the floor. Wolfe moved closer, his eyes scanning the scene. "Something happened here." Archie knelt beside the chair, his fingers brushing against a dark stain on the carpet. "Blood. Fresh, too." Wolfe's jaw tightened. "Search the apartment. Look for anything that might tell us where she's gone, or who took her." Archie nodded, moving quickly through the rooms. In the bedroom, he found a small desk tucked into the corner. The drawers were filled with old letters, receipts, and a faded journal. He flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Wolfe!" he called out. "You're going to want to see this." Wolfe joined him, taking the journal from Archie's hands. The entries were written in a neat, precise hand, detailing Evelyn's life at Blackwood Manor and her interactions with the victim. But it was the final entry that caught their attention. "They're coming for me. I should have stayed quiet, but I couldn't live with the guilt. If anyone finds this, know that the truth lies with the clock. 13 is the key." Wolfe closed the journal, his expression grim. She knew too much, and now she's gone. Archie frowned. "You think she was taken?" "Or worse," Wolfe replied. "But one thing is certain. We're not the only ones looking for her." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat in his chair, the journal open on his desk. Archie paced the room, his mind racing with possibilities. "So, what's next?" Archie asked. "We've got a missing witness, a cryptic journal, and a pocket watch. That doesn't tell time. Not exactly a lot to go on." Wolfe steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the watch. "On the contrary, we have more than we did yesterday. Evelyn Hart's journal confirms that the pocket watch is central to this mystery. We must decipher its meaning." "And how do we do that?" Wolfe leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "By visiting the one place where the clock strikes 13. Archie raised an eyebrow. "Blackwood Manor?" "Precisely," Wolfe said. "Prepare the car. We leave at dawn." Chapter 3. The FBI's Dark Secret. The drive to Blackwood Manor was a quiet one, the early morning mist clinging to the countryside like a shroud. Archie Goodwin navigated the winding roads with practiced ease, while Nero Wolfe sat in the back seat, his eyes closed in contemplation. The pocket watch rested in his palm, its 13-hour face a silent enigma. "You think the manor's still standing?" Archie asked, breaking the silence. "It was abandoned after the incident," Wolfe replied, without opening his eyes. "But estates like Blackwood are rarely left to decay. Someone has maintained it. Whether out of sentiment or necessity remains to be seen." Archie glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You think the FBI's involved?" Wolfe's lips twitched in a faint smile. The FBI's involvement in the original investigation was questionable. Their haste to close the case suggests they were either incompetent or complicit. Either way, they have secrets to protect. The manor came into view as they rounded a bend in the road, its Gothic spires piercing the grey sky. The building was imposing, its stone facade weathered but intact. The grounds, however, were overgrown, the once manicured gardens now a tangle of weeds and wild flowers. Archie parked the car at the edge of the driveway, his eyes scanning the property. No signs of life. "You think we'll find anything useful here?" "Every place holds its secrets," Wolfe said, stepping out of the car. "The trick is knowing where to look." The front door was locked, but a few well-placed tools from Archie's kit soon had it open. The interior of the manor was dim, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. Wolfe moved through the foyer with deliberate steps, his eyes taking in every detail. "Where do we start?" Archie asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The study," Wolfe replied. "If there's a clue to be found, it will be there." The study was located on the second floor, its heavy oak door creaking as they pushed it open. The room was lined with bookshelves, their contents untouched for decades. A large desk dominated the centre of the room, its surface cluttered with papers and trinkets. Wolfe approached the desk, his fingers brushing against a leather-bound ledger. He opened it, his eyes scanning the entries. "Financial records," he murmured. "Payments to contractors, suppliers, and one recurring name, Evelyn Hart." Archie leaned over his shoulder. "She was on the payroll?" "Not just on it," Wolfe said, his tone sharpening. "She was paid significantly more than the other staff, almost as if she were being compensated for something beyond her duties." "Blackmail?" Archie suggested. "Possibly," Wolfe replied. "Or perhaps she was privy to something far more valuable." As Wolfe continued to examine the ledger, Archie moved to the bookshelves, his fingers trailing along the spines of the books. One volume caught his eye, a slim, unmarked book wedged between two larger tomes. He pulled it free, flipping through the pages. "Wolfe," he said, holding up the book, "you're going to want to see this." Wolfe took the book, his eyes narrowing as he read the handwritten notes. The entries were cryptic, filled with references to the Society and the 13th Hour. But one passage stood out. "The FBI knows the truth, but they will never act. Their hands are tied by those who pull the strings. The clock is the key, but only for those who understand its secrets." Wolfe closed the book, his expression grim. "This confirms it. The FBI was not merely incompetent, they were complicit. Someone within their ranks ensured the case was buried." Archie frowned. "But why?" What's so important about this place? Wolfe's gaze drifted to the pocket watch in his hand. That, he said, is what we must uncover. As they left the study, a faint sound echoed through the manor, a soft rhythmic ticking. Wolfe paused, his head tilting as he listened. "You hear that?" Archie asked, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. Wolfe nodded. The clock. They followed the sound to a narrow staircase leading to the attic. The ticking grew louder as they climbed, the air growing colder with each step. At the top of the stairs, they found the source, a massive grandfather clock, its face marked with 13 numbers. 13 hours, Archie muttered, just like the pocket watch. Wolfe examined the clock, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. This is no ordinary timepiece. It's a mechanism, a puzzle, waiting to be solved. As he spoke, the clock's ticking grew louder, more insistent. Then, with a sudden click, the face of the clock swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a single item, a key, its design as ornate as the clock itself. Wolfe held the key up to the light, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "The first piece of the puzzle," Archie grinned. "Looks like we're on the right track." "Indeed," Wolfe said, his voice low. "But we must tread carefully. The FBI's secrets are not easily uncovered, and those who guard them will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who gets too close." Chapter 4. The Cipher in the Painting. The key from the grandfather clock gleamed in the dim light of the brownstone office as Nero Wolfe turned it over in his hands. Its intricate design suggested it was no ordinary key. It was a piece of art, crafted with precision and purpose. Archie Goodwin leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the key. "Any idea what it opens?" Archie asked, breaking the silence. "Not yet," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but tinged with intrigue. "But its design is reminiscent of a specific style, popular in the late 19th century, often used for private vaults or hidden compartments in estates like Blackwood Manor." Archie raised an eyebrow. "So, it could open anything from a safe to a secret door." "Precisely," Wolfe said, setting the key down. "But without knowing its intended use, we must rely on context. The clock led us to the key, and the key will lead us to the next clue." Archie picked up the key, examining it closely. "You think it's connected to the painting Evelyn Hart mentioned in her journal? The one with the cipher?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. An astute observation. The journal referenced a painting in the manor's gallery, one that held a hidden message. If we can locate it, we may find the next piece of the puzzle. The following morning, Wolfe and Archie returned to Blackwood Manor. The gallery was a long, narrow room on the 3rd floor, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and landscapes shrouded in gloom. Dust clung to the frames, and the air smelled of neglect. "Any idea which painting we're looking for?" Archie asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Evelyn's journal mentioned a portrait of Lady Blackwood," Wolfe replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "She was the last mistress of the manor before the incident. If there's a cipher, it will be there." They moved through the gallery, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Finally, Archie stopped in front of a large portrait of a woman in a flowing gown, her expression serene, but her eyes piercing. "This her?" Archie asked, gesturing to the painting. Wolfe stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the details. Indeed, Lady Eleanor Blackwood, a woman of considerable influence, and, if the rumours are to be believed, considerable secrets. Archie tilted his head, studying the painting. "So, where's the cipher? I don't see anything unusual." Wolfe's fingers brushed against the frame, his touch deliberate. "Ciphers are rarely obvious. They're designed to be hidden in plain sight." He paused, his attention caught by a faint irregularity in the painting's lower corner. "Here." Archie leaned in, squinting at the spot Wolfe indicated. "What am I looking at?" "The brush strokes," Wolfe said, his voice low. "They're slightly uneven, as if the artist made corrections, but upon closer inspection they form a pattern, a series of numbers and symbols." Archie pulled out a notebook and began sketching the pattern as Wolfe dictated. When they were finished, Wolfe studied the notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a substitution cipher," he said after a moment. "Each symbol corresponds to a letter. Once decoded, it should reveal a message." Archie grinned. "You're in your element now." Wolfe ignored the comment, his focus entirely on the cipher. After several minutes of silent calculation, he looked up, his expression unreadable. The message reads, "The truth lies beneath the rose." Archie frowned. "Beneath the rose? What does that mean?" Wolfe's gaze shifted to the painting's background, where a single red rose was depicted in the lower corner. "It's a literal clue. The rose in the painting points to a location within the manor." They returned to the ground floor, following the trail of the cipher's message. The rose motif appeared throughout the manor, carved into banisters, etched into stained glass, even woven into the carpets. But it was the garden that held the final clue. The rose garden was overgrown, its once pristine paths now choked with weeds. At its centre stood a stone fountain, its basin dry and cracked. Wolfe approached it, his eyes fixed on the base of the fountain, where a single rose was carved into the stone. "Here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Archie knelt beside him, brushing away the dirt and debris. Beneath the carving, they found a small rusted metal plate. Using the key from the grandfather clock, Wolfe inserted it into a nearly invisible keyhole. With a soft click, the plate swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, leather-bound book. Wolfe opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. The entries were written in the same hand as Evelyn Hart's journal, but the contents were far more revealing. "This," Wolfe said, his voice tinged with satisfaction, "is a record of payments, bribes, to be precise, made by the FBI to ensure the Blackwood case was never solved." Archie whistled softly. So, the FBI wasn't just incompetent. They were actively covering something up. "Indeed," Wolfe replied, his expression grim. "But the question remains. What were they trying to hide?" As they left the garden, a faint sound reached their ears, the distant hum of an engine. Archie turned, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "We've got company," said, his voice low. Wolfe's gaze followed the sound, his expression unreadable. "It seems our investigation has not gone unnoticed. We must proceed with caution." Archie nodded, his jaw tightening. You think they'll try to stop us?" "They already have," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But they underestimate the lengths to which I will go to uncover the truth." Chapter 5. The Society of Shadows. The leather-bound book lay open on Nero Wolfe's desk, its pages filled with damning evidence of FBI corruption. Archie Goodwin paced the room, his mind racing with the implications of what they'd uncovered. "So, the FBI was bribed to bury the Blackwood case," Archie said, his voice tight with frustration. "But who paid them? And why?" Wolfe steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the book. The payments were made through a series of shell companies, but the trail leads back to a single entity, a group referred to only as the Society. Archie stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. The Society sounds like some kind of secret club. "Precisely," Wolfe replied. "A clandestine organization with considerable influence, enough to manipulate the FBI and ensure their secrets remained hidden." Archie leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. "Any idea who's in this society?" "Not yet," Wolfe admitted, "but their reach is extensive. They've managed to operate in the shadows for decades, which suggests they have powerful allies." Archie frowned. "So, how do we find them?" Wolfe's lips twitched in a faint smile. "We let them find us. The plan was simple, but risky. Using the information from the ledger, Wolfe arranged a meeting with a retired FBI agent named Harold Grayson, one of the few names mentioned in the book. Grayson had been involved in the original investigation, but had since disappeared from public view. The meeting took place in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. Grayson was a wiry man in his late 60s, his face lined with years of stress and regret. He eyed Wolfe and Archie warily as they approached his booth. "You're playing with fire," Grayson said, his voice low and gravelly. "The Society doesn't take kindly to people poking around in their business." Wolfe slid into the booth across from him, his expression calm but resolute. "Then it's fortunate that I'm not easily intimidated. Tell me what you know." Grayson hesitated, his eyes darting around the diner as if expecting to be overheard. "The Society's been around for over a century. They're not just rich, they're powerful. Politicians, judges, even some in the FBI owe them favors. They operate in the shadows, pulling strings to protect their interests." "And the Blackwood case?" Archie asked, leaning against the booth. Grayson's face darkened. "That was their doing. They needed it buried, and they made sure it stayed that way. Anyone who got too close, well, let's just say they didn't last long." Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. "Why? What were they protecting?" Grayson shook his head. "I don't know the details, but it's big. Big enough to kill for." Archie exchanged a glance with Wolfe. "So, how do we find them?" Grayson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a man, Victor Langston. He's one of them. If anyone knows the Society's secrets, it's him. But getting to him won't be easy. He's paranoid, always surrounded by bodyguards." Wolfe nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "Where can we find him?" "He owns a club downtown," Grayson said, "the Silver Hour. But if you go there, you'd better be ready for a fight." That evening, Wolfe and Archie arrived at the Silver Hour, a sleek modern club pulsating with music and neon lights. The bouncer at the door eyed them suspiciously, but let them pass after a brief exchange. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the scent of expensive perfume. Archie scanned the room, his hand brushing against his holster. "You think Langston's here?" "Undoubtedly," Wolfe replied, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "But he won't make himself easy to find." They moved through the club, their presence drawing curious glances from the patrons. Finally, Archie spotted a man in a tailored suit standing near the bar, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone used to being in control. "That's him," Archie said, nodding toward the man. "Langston." Wolfe's expression remained neutral. "Approach him carefully. We don't want to spook him." Archie nodded, weaving through the crowd until he was standing beside Langston. "Mr. Langston," he said, his tone casual but firm, "we need to talk." Langston turned, his eyes narrowing. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," Archie replied, "but you'll want to hear what we have to say." Langston's gaze flicked to Wolfe, who stood a few feet away, his presence commanding even in the chaotic environment. For a moment, Langston hesitated. Then he gestured toward a private booth at the back of the club. "5 minutes," he said, his voice cold, "and make it worth my time." In the booth, Langston leaned back, his expression guarded. "What do you want?" "Information," Wolfe said, his voice calm but firm. "About the society." Langston's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We know you're one of them," Archie said, leaning forward. "And we know about the Blackwood case. So cut the act." Langston's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Wolfe continued, his tone measured. "We're not here to expose you, not yet. But if you cooperate, we may be able to reach an arrangement." Langston studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The society. They're not just a group. They're an institution, and they don't take kindly to outsiders." "Then it's fortunate we're not easily discouraged," Wolfe replied. "Tell us what we need to know, and we'll leave you in peace." Langston hesitated, then leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a meeting tomorrow night, at the old Opera House. If you want answers, that's where you'll find them. But I'd advise against it. They don't forgive trespassers." Wolfe's expression didn't change. "We'll take our chances." As they left the club, Archie glanced at Wolfe. "You think he's telling the truth?" "Perhaps," Wolfe replied. "But even if he's not, the Opera House is our best lead. We'll need to prepare." Archie nodded, his jaw set. "This is getting dangerous, Wolfe. If the society's as powerful as they say, then we must be smarter," Wolfe said, his voice calm but resolute, and more determined. Chapter 6. The Poisoned Tea. The old Opera House stood at the edge of the city, its grandeur faded but still imposing. Its towering columns and ornate carvings spoke of a time when it had been the heart of cultural life, but now it loomed like a ghost, its windows dark and its doors barred. Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin approached cautiously, the weight of the night pressing down on them. "You think they're already here?" Archie asked, his voice low as they circled the building. "Undoubtedly," Wolfe replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. but they won't make their presence obvious. We must proceed with care." They found a side entrance, its lock rusted but still functional. Archie made quick work of it, and they slipped inside, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors and empty rooms, their footsteps echoing faintly in the silence. "Where do we start?" Archie whispered, his hand resting on his holster. "The main hall," Wolfe said. "If they're meeting, it will be there." They moved through the building, their progress slow but deliberate. As they approached the main hall, the faint murmur of voices reached their ears. Wolfe held up a hand, signalling Archie to stop. They crouched behind a row of crumbling seats, peering through the gaps to the stage below. A group of men and women stood in a loose circle, their faces obscured by masks. At the centre of the group was a man in a tailored suit, Victor Langston. His voice carried through the hall, sharp and commanding. "We have a problem," Langston said, his tone cold. "Someone's been asking questions about the society, about Blackwood." A murmur rippled through the group, but one figure stepped forward, their mask gleaming in the dim light. "Who?" "Nero Wolfe," Langston replied, "and his associate, Archie Goodwin." Archie shot Wolfe a glance, but Wolfe's expression remained impassive. He gestured for silence, his attention fixed on the scene below. The masked figure tilted their head. "And what do you propose we do about it?" Langston's lips curled into a faint smile. "We eliminate the threat, permanently." As the meeting continued, Wolfe and Archie retreated to a nearby room to strategize. The air was tense, the stakes higher than ever. "They're planning to kill us," Archie said, his voice tight. "We need to get out of here." "Not yet," Wolfe replied, his tone calm but resolute. "We have an opportunity to learn more, but we must act quickly." Archie frowned. "What's the plan?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to a nearby service door. "We'll intercept Langston after the meeting. He's the key to unraveling this mystery." The meeting adjourned shortly after, the masked figures dispersing into the shadows. Langston lingered on the stage, his expression unreadable. Wolfe and Archie moved swiftly, positioning themselves near the exit. When Langston finally left the hall, they followed at a distance, their footsteps silent on the worn carpet. He led them to a small room at the back of the building, its door slightly ajar. Inside, a single lamp cast a pool of light over a table set with a teapot and 2 cups. Langston poured himself a cup of tea, his movements deliberate. He didn't seem surprised when Wolfe and Archie stepped into the room. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Langston said, his voice calm but edged with menace. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. "You knew we were here." "Of course," Langston replied. "You're not as subtle as you think." Archie's hand moved to his holster, but Wolfe held up a hand, stopping him. "We're not here to fight," Wolfe said. "We're here to talk." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Talk? About what?" "The society," Wolfe replied, "and the Blackwood case." Langston's expression darkened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Wolfe. One you can't win." "Perhaps," Wolfe said, his voice steady. "But I've never been one to back down from a challenge." Langston studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well. If you're so determined, I'll give you one chance. Sit." Wolfe and Archie exchanged a glance, then took the seats across from Langston. He poured tea into the second cup and pushed it toward Wolfe. "A gesture of goodwill," Langston said, his tone mocking. Wolfe picked up the cup, his movements deliberate. He sniffed the tea, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then, without a word, he set the cup down. "You'll forgive me if I decline," Wolfe said, his voice cold. "I have no desire to join Evelyn Hart in the afterlife." Langston's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Clever, but it won't save you." Archie's hand tightened on his holster. "What's in the tea?" "Arsenic," Wolfe replied, his gaze never leaving Langston. A favourite of the society, it seems. Langston leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for." "But it doesn't matter. You're already too late." "Too late for what?" Archie demanded. Langston's smile returned, cold and cruel. "To stop what's already in motion." Before Archie could react, the door burst open, and a group of armed men stormed into the room. Langston stood, his expression triumphant. "Goodbye, Mr. Wolfe," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "It's been a pleasure." As the men advanced, Wolfe and Archie moved swiftly. Archie drew his gun, firing a warning shot that sent the men scattering. Wolfe grabbed the teapot and hurled it at the nearest assailant, the scalding liquid buying them precious seconds. "This way!" Archie shouted, leading Wolfe toward a hidden exit he'd spotted earlier. They burst into the night, the cold air a sharp contrast to the tension inside. As they ran, Wolfe's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. "Langston's not the mastermind," Wolfe said, his voice tight. "He's a pawn. The real power lies elsewhere." Archie glanced at him. "Where?" Wolfe's expression was grim. "Blackwood Manor. It's time we returned." Chapter 7. The Missing Heiress. The drive back to Blackwood Manor was tense, the events at the Opera House still fresh in their minds. Archie Goodwin gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set as he navigated the winding roads. Nero Wolfe sat in the back seat, his expression unreadable, but his mind undoubtedly racing. "You really think the answers are back at the manor?" Archie asked, breaking the silence. "It's the only logical conclusion," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but resolute. And Langston's words were deliberate. He wanted us to return. Archie frowned. "And walk into another trap?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said, "but we have no other choice. The key to unravelling this mystery lies within those walls." When they arrived at the manor, the atmosphere was eerily still. The overgrown gardens and crumbling facade, a stark contrast to the grandeur they had once embodied. Wolfe and Archie moved cautiously, their senses heightened by the lingering threat. "Where do we start?" Archie asked, his hand resting on his holster. "The library," Wolfe replied. "If there's a clue we missed, it will be there." The library was as they had left it, dusty, dimly lit, and filled with the scent of old paper. Wolfe moved to the desk, his eyes scanning the surface for anything out of place. Archie began searching the shelves, his fingers trailing along the spines of the books. "Anything?" Archie asked after a few minutes. Wolfe didn't respond immediately, his attention caught by a faint irregularity in the desk's surface. He ran his fingers along the edge, feeling for a hidden mechanism. With a soft click, a hidden drawer slid open. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. Wolfe opened it, his eyes narrowing as he read the entries. "This belongs to Evelyn Hart," he said, his voice low. "But it's different from the one we found earlier. This one details her time at the manor, and her interactions with the Blackwood family." Archie leaned over his shoulder, scanning the pages. "Anything useful?" Wolfe's gaze lingered on a particular entry. "She mentions a child, a girl named Eleanor, the heiress to the Blackwood fortune. According to Evelyn, Eleanor disappeared shortly after the incident." Archie frowned. "Disappeared? You think she's still alive?" "It's possible," Wolfe replied, "and if she is, she may hold the key to unravelling this mystery." They left the library. A faint sound reached their ears, a soft rhythmic tapping. Wolfe paused, his head tilting as he listened. "You hear that?" Archie asked, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. Wolfe nodded. "It's coming from the east wing." They followed the sound to a narrow staircase leading to the attic. The tapping grew louder as they climbed, the air growing colder with each step. At the top of the stairs they found the source. A young woman, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Wolfe stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "My name is Nero Wolfe. This is my associate Archie Goodwin. We're here to help." The woman hesitated, her gaze darting between them. "Help? How?" "We're investigating the Blackwood case," Wolfe replied, "and we believe you may have information that could prove invaluable." The woman's eyes widened further. "You know about the case?" "We do," Archie said, his voice gentle. "And we know you're Eleanor Blackwood." For a moment the woman said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she nodded. "Yes, I'm Eleanor." They led her to the study, where Wolfe poured her a cup of tea. Eleanor's hands shook as she accepted it, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "Why did you disappear?" Archie asked, his tone careful. Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't have a choice. After my parents died, I was sent to live with my uncle. But he was involved with the society. When I found out what they were doing, I knew I had to run." Wolfe's expression didn't change. "What were they doing?" Eleanor hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "They were using the manor as a front for their operations. Smuggling, money laundering, and worse. When I confronted my uncle, he threatened me. Said if I told anyone, I'd end up like my parents." Archie's jaw tightened. "You think they killed your parents?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know they did, but I couldn't prove it. So I ran. I've been hiding ever since." Wolfe leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Where is your uncle now?" "Dead," Eleanor replied, her voice hollow. "The society killed him too. He knew too much." As they left the study, Archie glanced at Wolfe. "You think she's telling the truth?" "I do," Wolfe replied. "But there's more to this story than she's revealed. We must tread carefully." Archie nodded, his expression grim. "So, what's next?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the trees. "We confront the society, but first we need proof." Chapter 8. The Clockmaker's Clue. The first light of dawn filtered through the dusty windows of Blackwood Manor, casting long shadows across the study. Eleanor Blackwood sat stiffly in a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Nero Wolfe paced the room, his brow furrowed in thought. Archie Goodwin leaned against the desk, his arms crossed, his eyes darting between Wolfe and Eleanor. "You said your uncle was involved with the society," Wolfe began, his voice calm but probing. "Did he ever mention a clockmaker?" Eleanor frowned, her gaze distant as she searched her memory. "A clockmaker? Yes, actually. He used to talk about a man named Mr. Grayson, Harold Grayson. He was the one who maintained the clocks in the Adieu Manor. My uncle trusted him implicitly." Archie raised an eyebrow. "The same Harold Grayson we met at the diner." Wolfe's lips twitched in a faint smile. "It would appear so. Mr. Grayson's involvement in this case grows more intriguing by the moment." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You've spoken to him?" "Briefly," Wolfe replied. "But he was reluctant to share much. Perhaps now, with your testimony, he'll be more forthcoming." Archie pushed off the desk, his expression determined. "So we're paying him another visit." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "but this time we'll be better prepared." The drive to Harold Grayson's workshop was a quiet one, the tension in the car palpable. When they arrived, the small, unassuming building looked much as it had before, its windows dark, its door slightly ajar. Archie exchanged a glance with Wolfe before stepping inside, his hand resting on his holster. The workshop was cluttered with clocks of all shapes and sizes, their ticking creating a rhythmic hum that filled the air. Grayson stood at a workbench, his back to them, his hands busy with a delicate mechanism. He didn't turn as they entered. "I was wondering when you'd show up," Grayson said, his voice weary but not surprised. "We need your help," Wolfe said, stepping forward. "And this time you're going to give it to us." Grayson sighed, setting down his tools and turning to face them. His eyes were tired, his face lined with regret. "I told you before, this isn't a fight you can win." "Maybe not," Archie said, his tone sharp. "But we're not backing down, and neither should you." Grayson studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you want to know?" "The clocks," Wolfe said, his gaze steady. "Specifically, the grandfather clock in Blackwood Manor." "What's its significance?" Grayson hesitated, then walked to a nearby shelf and pulled down a large, leather-bound book. He opened it to a page filled with intricate diagrams and notes, handing it to Wolfe. "That clock isn't just a timepiece," Grayson said. "It's a map. The engravings on its face correspond to locations within the manor. Hidden rooms, secret passages, that sort of thing." Wolfe's eyes narrowed as he studied the diagrams. "And the 13-hour face?" "A code," Grayson replied. "Each number corresponds to a specific location. The society used it to hide their operations, smuggled goods, documents, even people." Archie frowned. "People?" Grayson's expression darkened. "They weren't just smugglers, Mr. Goodwin. They were traffickers, and the manor was their hub." Wolfe's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And you helped them." Grayson looked away, his guilt evident. "I didn't have a choice. They threatened my family. but I've regretted it every day since." Wolfe closed the book, his expression unreadable. "Where is the clock now?" "Still in the manor," Grayson said. "But it's not just the clock you need. There's a key, a special key that unlocks its secrets." Wolfe reached into his pocket and pulled out the ornate key they'd found in the fountain. "This one?" Grayson's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "That's not important," Wolfe replied. "What is important is that you help us use it." Back at Blackwood Manor, Wolfe and Archie returned to the grandfather clock, the key in hand. Grayson had provided detailed instructions, and they followed them carefully, inserting the key into a hidden slot at the base of the clock. With a soft click, the face of the clock swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, leather-bound ledger. Wolfe opened it, his eyes scanning the entries. The contents were damning. Names, dates, and amounts, all detailing the society's operations. "This is it," Archie said, his voice tight with excitement. "This is the proof we need." Wolfe nodded, his expression grim. "But it's not enough. We need to confront the society directly." As they left the manor, a faint sound reached their ears, the distant hum of an engine. Archie turned, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "We've got company," he said, his voice low. Wolfe's gaze followed the sound, his expression unreadable. "It seems our investigation has not gone unnoticed. We must proceed with caution." Archie nodded, his jaw tightening. "You think they'll try to stop us?" "They already have," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But they underestimate the lengths to which I will go to uncover the truth." Chapter 9. The Betrayal. Within. The ledger from the grandfather clock lay open on Nero Wolfe's desk, its pages filled with names, dates, and transactions that painted a damning picture of the society's operations. Archie Goodwin stood by the window, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the street below for any sign of trouble. The tension in the room was palpable, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. "This ledger implicates some powerful people," Archie said, his voice low. "Politicians, judges, even a few high-ranking FBI officials. If we go public with this, it'll blow the lid off everything." Wolfe steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. "Indeed, but we must proceed with caution. The society will not take this lightly." Archie turned to face him, his jaw tight. "So, what's the plan? We can't just sit on this." "We won't," Wolfe replied. "But we need allies, people we can trust to help us bring this to light." Archie frowned. "Trust is in short supply these days. How do we know who's on our side?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to the ledger. "We start with those who have the most to lose and the most to gain." Their first stop was the office of District Attorney Richard Hargrove, a man known for his integrity and his relentless pursuit of justice. Hargrove listened intently as Wolfe laid out the evidence, his expression growing darker with each passing minute. "This is explosive," Hargrove said, his voice tight with anger. "If what you're saying is true, it's not just a scandal, it's a conspiracy." "It is true," Wolfe replied, his tone calm but firm. "And we need your help to bring it to light." Hargrove hesitated, his eyes darting to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. "I want to help, but this is dangerous. The Society has eyes and ears everywhere. If they find out I'm involved—" "They already know," Archie said, his voice sharp. "And they're coming for us. The only way out is through." Hargrove studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll do what I can, but we need to move quickly." As they left Hargrove's office, Archie glanced at Wolfe. "You think he'll hold up under pressure?" "He's our best chance," Wolfe replied. "But we must prepare for the possibility that the Society will try to silence him." Archie's jaw tightened. "We need to protect him." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "but we also need to protect ourselves. The Society's reach is extensive, and they will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." That evening, as they prepared to leave the brownstone, the phone rang. Archie answered it, his expression darkening as he listened. "Today, it's Hargrove," he said, his voice tight. "He's been attacked. He's in the hospital." Wolfe's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "We need to see him. Now." At the hospital, they found Hargrove in a private room, his face bruised and bandaged. He looked up as they entered, his eyes filled with pain and anger. "They came for me," he said, his voice hoarse. "Two men. They knew everything. They said if I didn't back off, they'd kill me." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his eyes were cold. "Did you recognize them?" Hargrove shook his head. "No, but they were professionals. They knew what they were doing." Archie exchanged a glance with Wolfe. "This changes things, if they're willing to go this far." "It means we're close," Wolfe said, his voice steady. "But we must be smarter and more careful." As they left the hospital, Archie's mind raced with possibilities. "We need to find out who's behind this. If we can identify the men who attacked Hargrove—" "We will," Wolfe replied. "But first, we need to secure the ledger. If the Society gets their hands on it, all of this will have been for nothing." Archie nodded, his expression grim. "So what's the plan?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "We set a trap, and we make sure the Society walks right into it." Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The brownstone was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Nero Wolfe sat in his office, the ledger from Blackwood Manor open on his desk. Archie Goodwin paced the room, his mind racing with the details of their plan. The trap was set, but the stakes were higher than ever. "You think they'll take the bait?" Archie asked, breaking the silence. "They have no choice," Wolfe replied, his voice calm but resolute. "The ledger is too dangerous for them to ignore. They'll come for it, and for us." Archie stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "And when they do, we'll be ready," Wolfe said, his gaze steady. "But we must be precise. One misstep, and this entire operation will collapse." The plan was simple but risky. They had leaked false information to their contacts, suggesting that the ledger would be moved to a secure location that night. The Society, desperate to recover it, would have no choice but to act. Wolfe and Archie would be waiting, along with a small team of trusted allies, to intercept them. As the sun set, they made their way to the designated location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building was dark and silent, its windows boarded up and its doors rusted shut. Inside, they set up their positions, the tension in the air almost tangible. "You think they'll send their best?" Archie asked, his voice low as he checked his weapon. "Undoubtedly," Wolfe replied, his tone grim. "But we have the advantage of surprise and the truth on our side." The hours passed slowly, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. Then, just after midnight, the sound of footsteps reached their ears, soft, deliberate, and unmistakably human. "They're here," Archie whispered, his hand tightening on his weapon. Wolfe nodded, his expression unreadable. "Wait for my signal." The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, a man in a dark suit, his face obscured by a mask. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. Behind him, 2 more figures followed, their movements equally deliberate. Wolfe stepped into the light, his voice calm but commanding. "You're too late!" The man froze, his hand moving to his weapon, but before he could draw, Archie stepped out of the shadows, his gun trained on the intruders. "Don't even think about it," Archie said, his tone sharp. The man hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake," said, his voice cold. "The society doesn't forgive trespassers." "And I don't forgive murderers," Wolfe replied, his gaze steady. "Drop your weapons." The man hesitated, then nodded to his companions. They slowly lowered their weapons to the ground, their eyes never leaving Wolfe and Archie. "Now," Wolfe said, his voice calm but firm, "tell us who you're working for." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "You already know." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Victor Langston." The man nodded. "He's waiting for you, but I wouldn't keep him waiting too long. He's not a patient man." As they secured the intruders, Archie glanced at Wolfe. "You think Langston's behind this?" "He's a pawn," Wolfe replied, his tone grim. "But he's our best. Lead to the mastermind." Archie nodded, his jaw tightening. "So what's the plan?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the trees. "We finish this." Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin stood outside the warehouse, the captured society operatives secured in the back of a police van. District Attorney Richard Hargrove had arrived with a small team of trusted officers, his face still bruised, but his determination unwavering. "You've done it," Hargrove said, his voice tinged with awe, as he glanced at the ledger in Wolfe's hands. "This is enough to bring down the society, or at least cripple them." "It's a start," Wolfe replied, his tone measured. "But the mastermind remains at large. Victor Langston is our next target." Archie leaned against the car, his arms crossed. "Langston's not going to come quietly. He's got resources, connections. He'll fight back." "Then we'll be ready," Wolfe said, his gaze steady. "But we must act swiftly. The longer we wait, the more time he has to cover his tracks." The drive to Langston's estate was tense, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on them. The estate was a sprawling property on the outskirts of the city, its gates tall and imposing. Archie parked the car a short distance away, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "You think he's expecting us?" Archie asked, his voice low. "Undoubtedly," Wolfe replied. "But he won't be prepared for what comes next." They approached the gates cautiously, their movements deliberate. As they reached the entrance, a voice crackled over an intercom. "Mr. Wolfe," Langston's voice said, cold and mocking, "I've been expecting you." The gates swung open, and they stepped inside, their senses heightened by the tension in the air. The estate was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. "Stay sharp," Archie muttered, his hand resting on his holster. They reached the front door, which opened before they could knock. A butler stood in the doorway, his expression impassive. "Mr. Langston is waiting for you in the study," the butler said, his tone neutral. Wolfe and Archie exchanged a glance, then followed the butler inside. The study was a lavish room, its walls lined with books and expensive artwork. Langston sat behind a large desk, his expression calm, but his eyes cold. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Wolfe," Langston said, his voice dripping with malice. "But you're too late. The society is already moving against you." Wolfe's expression didn't change. "Then it's fortunate we're here to stop you." Langston's lips curled into a faint smile. "You think you can win? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time." Archie stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We've got the ledger. We've got names, dates, transactions, enough to bring down the society and everyone involved." Langston's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "The ledger is meaningless without the mastermind, and you'll never find him." Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. "We already have." Langston's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise. "You're bluffing?" "Am I?" Wolfe replied, his tone calm but firm. "The Society's operations are too extensive, too coordinated for someone like you to manage alone. There's someone above you, someone pulling the strings." Langston's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Wolfe continued, his voice steady. "But you're not the only one with secrets, Mr. Langston. We know about the mastermind, and we're coming for him." As they left the estate, Archie glanced at Wolfe. "You think he bought it?" "He did," Wolfe replied, his tone grim. "But the real question is whether the mastermind did." Archie frowned. "What do you mean?" Wolfe's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "The Society's power lies in its secrecy. If we can force the mastermind into the open, we can end this.